Hello friends, welcome to the channel. Bob here, and welcome to a bit of a different video today. For those of you who are old hands at the channel, you'll be amazed to find out this is my first video. Not my first video, but it's kind of one of the very few videos I've done where I'm not playing. So you're watching some gameplay footage and I'm talking. I thought this might mean that there's less waffle in the video and it's more to the point. We'll see about that. I'm not sure. But anyway, yeah, I thought I would do it this way just to see how things go. I don't have a script because I hate scripts. But I do have some notes, so hopefully things won't go too awry, and 40 minutes later you're still wondering about what the video was about. Anyway, without further ado, let's get on with it. So this video is about, someone asked me how I was getting on with playing games that I'm currently playing. The MMOs that I'm playing, how do they compare to other MMOs that I've played, etc, etc, and that kind of thing. And so I thought I'd incorporate that into this video, because this is a video that I've been thinking about doing for a while. So it's going to be a general... I personally think that MMOs are in a massive funk. So it's going to be a bit about MMOs in general. And then I'll do like a playlist of MMOs that I'm playing at the moment, how I'm finding them, and like why I'm playing them. Maybe we'll see how we go. But anyway, we'll start off with the funk stuff, talking about MMOs generally. So if you don't want to know about specific MMOs at the end, you can just turn off or whatever. Maybe you do. I don't know. But I think that, I think the first thing to point out, I think, and for many people, it's one of the most important things, but not for me. And that's the general way that MMOs, or games in general, develop now. You know, pre-alphas, pre-alpha, alpha, alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 500, beta, beta 15. You know, I think a lot of people are sick of that way of development. Or certainly when I look around forums and stuff and people that I've spoken to, that's the general feeling that I get. There are some people out there who kind of, you know, troll along with the, not troll along, kind of, you know, ride along with the attitude that a game in MMO will be done when it's done, and they'd rather that time was taken. I kind of sit in the middle of those two views, but I do know that the way that not just MMOs but games in general are being developed now are a big issue for some people, and I can understand that. I think that, I mean, I'm, you know, sounding my age here because I'm old, but you know, back in the day when I played games, even back in the 90s and stuff, really, you never really knew what a game was going to be exactly until it came out. You know, there wasn't this massive amount of exposure and build up that you get on the internet now. A game came out and you tried it, or you read a review essentially in a magazine, if you can imagine such things. I'm reading things from paper. Yeah, and you made your decision that way. I mean, I remember when I bought Ultima Online, I bought it from a shop because I saw the box on the shelf and I was familiar with the Ultima games. It said it was an MMO or a, you know, whatever that was at the time. I wasn't really sure, and I got it and played it, and that was that was my introduction to MMOs. But I can understand why. But what I was going to say, the Ultima Online point was the fact that I bought the game, took it home, installed the disc, and it worked. You know, I didn't have to then wait for however, well, it would have only been megabytes, I guess, at the time, because, you know, back in those days, you paid for your internet by the minute as you did your phone bill, and it cost a fortune. But I took the game home and I installed it and it worked. When I'm not sure what the first Ultima expansion was, Ultima Online expansion. I think it might have been Ultima Online Second Age. When that came out, I bought the disc, took it home, installed it, and it pretty much worked. You know, there was no waiting around for patches and stuff, or just for whole games to download. The game was generally on the disc. You know, you might need a patch via a floppy disk or something, but generally they just worked. But I can understand why people have kind of had enough of this way of developing. I think certainly, I mean, a lot of people kind of, you know, proclaim that indie developers are the ones that are keeping the gaming industry going at the moment, and I do agree with that to a certain extent. Pretty certainly on the non-MMO side of things, but I think on the MMO side, it seems to have given indie developers almost a license to never finish a game, like it's perpetually in alpha or beta or whatever it may be. And I think that goes for the same for people who are developing games, developing their MMOs. There's one or two big ones that I can think of at the moment, like in a closed environment where it's not open for anyone to play, but the development is still exposed in quite a large way, so you know what phase they're in. We're currently in alpha 900, and you know, maybe in 6 months we'll be in 901, and you know, and I generally just think people are fed up with that. We're willing to suffer the waiting or whatever it may be because we're excited and we want to play these games. But I think just to cover the basics, I think that's a real issue. And I think in some cases people have lost money investing in MMOs. MMOs. There are some indie MMOs out there which are now kind of pretty much dead from a population point of view, but they're kind of ticking over. And the people that invested early on are really burnt. People talk about WoWs and stuff, and I'm not one of those, and I understand that we get caught up in stuff, and we get to a point where we love something or someone or a creative who we really like, a person so much that we're willing to throw money at them, hoping that it works. But often in those kind of situations, it doesn't, because the development shouldn't be in a state or at a stage where you're having to throw money at where a player is having to keep throwing money at it to keep it going. That's not a healthy situation. So I think there are a lot of people that are kind of fed up with that from an MMO point of view. They're fed up with waiting for MMOs that they're currently playing to get to a point where maybe they're fixed and bugs are fixed, etc. A lot of people are just sick of waiting for an MMO that is being given loads of exposure by the devs, but these games are still years away, and you kind of think to yourself, well, what's the point? A perfect example is I was really surprised at how the lack of interest in like Pantheon, for example, is showing. Like when you go to the official website and you look at the YouTube channels covering it, even YouTube channels that seem to be playing it and kind of shilling for it a bit, really. Like the views on, maybe my expectations are too high, but the views on them are not very high. I mean, I'm just some average YouTube spud, and like my videos have got more. Some of my videos have got more views than Pantheon videos are getting, and so I'm not sure if that's just a malaise and people are just fed up with waiting, so they're going to just ignore it for now, and as it gets closer to release they'll get into it more, or maybe because of the way they've been talking about the game, it being a bit more hardcore, blah blah blah, maybe there's just not a massive interest in that kind of thing. I really don't know. On the other hand of the scale, you've got like Shroud of the Avatar, where you've got Chris, who was currently the owner and the developer, is now working on another, what seems like a con NFT that Richard Garriott has come out with. And please, if any of you are thinking about investing in that, I don't care how much you like Ultimate or Richard Garriott, just don't. It's going to be a crap show, probably worse than Shroud of the Avatar. And on the other end of the scale, you've got Shroud of the Avatar, which just had promise, but had kind of people at the top who really didn't care, only in it for the money, so they moved on when it failed. And now you've got a group of people just trying to keep it going by, trying to get more and more money out of the people that are heavily financially and emotionally invested in it. So, that's a bad thing. I think the next thing also is, again, it's another dev thing really, and I think it's the way that developers stick to their vision. I'm not sure if it's called that now, but back in the day when I played EverQuest and stuff, they started making balance changes and nerfs and all that kind of thing, and it became known as the vision. And I think that developers stick too rigidly to their vision, particularly when they see that maybe things are not working. For all that people rail against New Worlds, one of the things that I think they did do was they moved away from their vision, because I see it wasn't going to be successful. I used to be a heavy PvP player in Ultima Online, and I played some Shadowbane and some other games. But no matter how much the PvP audience want you to think that it's what everyone wants, it's really not. People that want a proper hardcore PvP game are small relatively to the in regards to the MMO audience. And I will say that New World actually did move away from their vision a bit, because that was going to be a hardcore kind of RPG survival game. And they when they did some early alpha testing or feature testing, they realised that there just wasn't enough interest in it, not enough interest for the money that they were putting into it, so they quickly, over the course of a very short space of time, introduced a PvE environment, which hasn't worked in my opinion, but that's another story. So I think devs sticking to their vision too much, and I think it's hard. It might sound like I'm being harsh, like having a pop at indie developers, but I do think that they're more guilty of it. I think, and I do sympathise with them a bit, because they get you get a core audience, and because your audience isn't growing particularly, maybe you're seeing some people coming in every now and again, and that's fine, but it's not really growing a huge amount. Your game might be very niche. You fall into this trap of having to develop for the audience you've currently got, and I can kind of understand it, because you think, well, if I lose them, then the game's going to close. So and I think the problem with all indie MMO audiences is they're small, and they've kind of really laid claim to that game because there's not many people playing it, so there's a lot in MMO, in gaming, and in MMOs. I find particularly there's a lot of ego amongst players, I find. So players in a small indie MMO want to be a face because it's easier to be a face when there's a small audience. You see it on forums and in game. People who are more chatty and active in chat, even though they're not really talking, they're just talking words. They want to be known. So and it's one of the, and so they also gatekeep as well. So you get a situation where they then gatekeep new players coming in. So new players come in and might suggest, well, this feature's a bit rough. I mean, how about doing it this way? This seems more friendly, and maybe you'll attract more people. And those old players who have been playing the game for a while, they don't want their power disrupted. They don't want their fame to diminish by new players coming in. I've seen all this stuff. I'm not making it up. I've seen all this stuff before in a number of MMOs, mostly in indie MMOs in recent years. But they don't want their little power base, whether it's in-game power or financial power from RMT or selling stuff or whatever it may be, to be diminished. And there are certain mechanics in the game that feed that power creep that they've got, where they're always gaining wealth, in whatever form it may be, and they don't want that to be disrupted. So when someone comes in with a new idea, they immediately try and gatekeep them. I've seen this in Shrouded Avatar a lot. I've seen it even in Project Gorgon, Worm Online, and all of those more, I guess, niche indie MMOs that I've played. So the devs and the audience combination, I think, is a real problem. The devs, I mean, I'm sure there are some devs that this is exactly what we want to do and this is exactly what we're doing. But in the heart of hearts, there must be occasions where, they think this would be a good idea, whether it's a quality of life thing or a big mechanical change or whatever it may be. But they don't do it because they know that there's their small rabid fan base. Some of them will just not like it, and if they change it, they'll go to town and create all sorts of hassle. So they get to a situation where they're trying to develop the game for that audience, the captured audience, when really, in my opinion, you should be finding ways to attract new players. And games, in indie games, the ones that I've mentioned, I've seen them talk about they are trying to attract new players and they're making changes for new players and stuff. But really, I don't see that particularly. I really don't think that that's happening. I think the problem with indie developers as well is that they want their... we all talk about games being too simple, homogenized, sanitized, really. They're all the same experience. We want different experiences. And I agree with that. But I think many indie game developers, particularly in the MMO genre, go too far. Instead of having a balance between the two, they come up with these most obscure, grindy, unexplained systems in their games that just put players off. And it's, I don't know, maybe it's better for those developers to have smaller audiences. I'm not sure. Because having a bigger audience means you've got to spend more money on customer service, more money on development. You've got to chuck content out quicker. Maybe that's the issue. But I do think the audience has something to play here, and I've seen some. It's funny how there are these. All the games I've mentioned talk about how great a community they've got, but actually, when you look a bit closer, community is actually no less toxic than like the World of Warcraft community, for example. In my opinion, I've seen some really horrible stuff going around on Shrouded Avatar forums, even a lot of toxicity with regards to Worm Online when someone comes in with different ideas, or Project Gorgon when someone comes in and says something that goes against the status quo. So they're good at their they're good communities when you agree with everything that's going on. Pretty much like politics at the moment on Twitter, right? I mean that it's basically the same thing, but in MMO form. So I think that's to blame as well for why I'm feeling in a bit of a funk generally. And these are also things that I've seen on forums and that people have mentioned to me. But I think the biggest one for me is the basics of a game, and that's the gameplay. I know that some of you who never played these games before will think that I'm exaggerating, but if you take classic EverQuest back in the day, or if you play on Project 1999 now, which emulates classic as closely as it can, you could go into a dungeon in EverQuest, say Guck, and you could go with a group, and you could go into that dungeon 100 times, and every one of those times your experience will be different. And it will be different because of the way the dungeon's designed, because of the mechanics, the way that even simple gameplay choices, like if a mob gets to a certain health level, they'll get scared and they'll run away. Even something like that creates such a tactical and a word that I like, emerging. I like emerging gameplay. So as I'm going around my games, I like things to just happen because of the mechanics involved, things that are unexpected, things that are maybe not even designed to be in the game, but you see this quite often in open world games. I know Cyberpunk was much maligned when it first came out. Cyberpunk is one of the greatest games I've ever played, just for me, from an immersive gameplay experience, but I know lots of people have problems with it. But most of the emergent gameplay you see, like to try and give you an example of what I'm talking about, is through bugs. So you might be driving along in your car in, if you take GTA actually, or I remember you might be driving along in your car in GTA and someone runs someone over, and you run into the back of someone, and everyone gets out of their cars, and suddenly they all start fighting. There's a big fight, or you can do something in the game which causes a traffic jam, or a mass brawl, or slaughter, or whatever it may be. This is emerging gameplay. It's gameplay that is just unexpected, and it happens through. And this gameplay emerges through systems that are in the game, and this gameplay can be something that even the devs didn't intend, but the systems are so kind of like well designed and complex that these things kind of just happen. And EverQuest is one of those MMOs, as I said, where you can go into a dungeon 100 times and your experience will be different because there are so many, because of the way the levels are designed, because of the different abilities and actions that the mob have got, because of the AI. As I said, even there's something as simple as the way that a mob will flee. So if it flees, you're desperately trying to crowd control it or kill it, because if it goes around a corner where there are 4 more mobs, they will all aggro. So then your group has got another 4 mobs to deal with. So it's creating these exciting, tense gameplay moments, just out of a simple mechanic where a player may run away. Like I was when I was playing on TAC-P recently, which is another EverQuest a server. I was in a dungeon and there was a mob in there, an enchanter mob, and it charmed me. And I was its pet. The rest of my party was dead. So this mob was wandering around the dungeon, and I was just following it. Basically, I couldn't do anything, and it walked into a deeper part of the dungeon that was too high level for me, and then the enchantment wore off, and I died. But it was the fact that a mob could just charm me, and I was helpless, and it was walking around a dungeon, and I had to follow it, and I could see what was going on as it would go through its route of walking around a dungeon and stop here and there, etc. Yeah, and it was amazing. That's the kind of thing that blows you away, and it's something that you just don't see in MMOs. And at this point, I'm amazed that an MMO that was so old can have all of these brilliant gameplay ideas and mechanics that lead to these kind of things. But people have now have forgotten all of that. They're just developing fairly homogenized experiences. I mean, I look at the new MMOs currently in development, and I'm not seeing this. Maybe this stuff is hidden and they're not showing it yet. I would hope that Pantheon will have this kind of stuff, because even though there's quite a lot I don't like about the way the development of Pantheon's gone, it looks to still have that uncertainty when you go into a dungeon. I'm hoping, like the games I'm playing at the moment, if I go into a new world dungeon, it's the same. All the a lot of it is to do with like having to like racing or the mobs just not being dangerous enough or being too easy to kill. So it's just a DPS fest. There's no tactics at all, and the dungeon's not designed to have tactics. Apart from a couple of things where you got to stand on three people have got to stand on a stone, or you might get a boss that's got some stuff you need to be aware of. But other than that, the dungeon experience is incredibly boring. And and I think it's why I know that for younger players, maybe they think, oh yeah, whatever, all right, Dad, all right, Granddad. But honestly, some of the mechanics that EverQuest had, even in its vanilla form when it first came out, and how solid it was to play and free of like bugs, I guess you would say. Obviously there were bugs, it's an MMO, but yeah, how free of issues it was, to this day still amazes me. Like the faction system, there were so many different factions in the game that were all intertwined. Like you go into a city and there's different factions, and if a certain faction didn't like you, you had to sneak through a certain part of the city, or through or go invisible or that kind of thing, and you could increase your faction with people that hated you, so they didn't hate you anymore. And factions are all tied into what would go on within the world, so creatures would fight each other, people from opposing factions would fight each other, all that kind of stuff, and it's that kind of gameplay and intricate but well implemented systems that you just don't see. And I think it's where everything just feels very, as I said, like homogenized. It's all very similar. When I go into a dungeon in a game at the moment, like I take Lost Ark, for example, you go into a raid or a dungeon, it's not really a dungeon, it's just like an environment you run around and you slaughter mobs, and that's it really. You've got the Guardian raids and the raids at the end game, but again, I watch them and they seem to play out in a very similar way. You've just got one big mob that's got a certain move set. Once you learn that move set, you beat the mob. This mob's not suddenly going to charm one of the players and set that player fighting someone else, in your group, because that's what EverQuest did. You're not going to get that. It's just not. The games are designed now for you to go in and kind of kill something, and generally it's in the most efficient way possible. All of these interesting systems that older MMOs had. Ultra Online had plenty of it as well. Yeah, just not there anymore. And so, yeah, personally, I just find it's the gameplay is just pretty basic, and that's the difference, I think, between the more modern MMOs I'm playing at the moment and the MMOs that I used to play. Someone asked me about kind of a comparison, and I think the fact that I can go from New World to Lost Ark to, I'm going to include Final Fantasy 14 in that. I know some people won't like that. I do like Final Fantasy 14 for other reasons. And Final Fantasy 14 does actually have a bit of that, but I'll talk about that towards the end of the video. So those are the things that I primarily am in a bit of an MMO funk. I've started playing more modern MMOs to what I'm used to playing, because I'm looking for an experience to complement EverQuest, whether it's P99 or whether it's TAC-P. But the problem is that the game experiences are just incredibly shallow. Unless you're looking for a good story-driven MMO or game, which is what Final Fantasy 14 is, the actual mechanics surrounding it are fairly basic and boring. There's no game that's got interesting, intricate faction systems that are all interwoven into the world, so it feels really political. The gameplay is very formulaic. So you go into a dungeon and you kind of almost know what you're going to get. Very, very, very often have I been in. Well, I've never been in a dungeon in, say, Lost Ark yet, or New World, or Final Fantasy 14. Although I'm not very far into that game, where something has happened that felt unexpected because of the way the mechanics in the game kind of interact and work with each other. So yeah, that's how I feel about modern MMOs and more recent MMOs. But I think that's a thing with the gaming audience, the gaming development in general. I find it hilarious that some Ubisoft developers of all people were criticising Elden Ring. Elden Ring, literally probably one of the best games I've ever played, if not the best game I've ever played. certainly from an immersion point of view. And it's also got plenty of that gameplay within it, you know, where these things just happen because of how amazingly detailed and intricate all of the systems are, and the sheer quality of exploring the new world. But that just goes to show you, doesn't it, the fact that Ubisoft, a company where pretty much all of their franchises, whoever's developing them, are kind of almost the same game but with a different skin. You know, we're criticising Elden Ring. Yeah, pretty amazing, really. Yeah, so I'm in an MMO funk for the things that I have mentioned. I'm sure you've got lots of other reasons if you're fed up with particular MMOs or if you're not playing them at the moment. I'm sure I've just kind of just covered the things that I've. One thing I want to go back to actually is the gatekeeping. Someone mentioned it to me in a video a while ago. Left a comment about it, and I do absolutely agree. I think there is a load of gatekeeping going on in MMOs, particularly indie ones, because as I said before, you know, these people don't want their experience to change. Even in some cases, like Shroud of the Avatar, if it would actually be beneficial for the health of the game, because the health of the game is not their first fault. You know, that's not what they want from the game. They want this experience that they've got and they've created for themselves, and they don't want that to change because it means that it might be a shift in power base, or, you know, they'll lose what they've got, what they've accomplished, etc., etc. And it wouldn't even be. I wouldn't mind really if in certain games the accomplishments were gameplay orientated, but a lot of them are just if you've got a big enough pocket, are you willing to put your hand in your pocket? Basically, that's how it seems to me anyway. But yeah, like gatekeeping also by players of these MMOs is a big issue. Probably less so in like World of Warcraft because it's a bigger audience, so there's a lot more people shouting. But in smaller games, it definitely is a problem. I think also developers, going back to developers sticking to their, just something else I thought of, developers sticking to their vision. I think developers and players have lost sight of what makes a game hard. So what makes a game hard for me is a game where the gameplay is hard, okay? And when I say hard, I'm not talking about, you know, Elden Ring hard. You know, Elden Ring's a different type of game. I'm not talking about going into a boss and dying, and you just to a point where you quit. Although I never really had that problem in Elden Ring. You know, some people do have that. But people are starting to mistake difficulty for grinding. So yeah, so difficulty now is a time-based thing. So if you dare to go into an MMO, generally, as I said, the indie ones I've been playing, and suggest this is a bit grindy, is there any way of changing it? You'll get that gatekeeping, you know. And I'm not quite sure why it is, because these kind of things would be beneficial to everyone. You would think, or I would think, you would hope, you know, you would think that it would be beneficial to everyone if something was a bit less grindy. I understand that MMOs have got grind, because that's always the argument. Well, it's an MMO, of course. But people always say, well, it's an MMO. It's like that. Like that's just how they are. Can you imagine accepting that? Can you imagine? I can't imagine being someone who just thinks, oh well, I'll put up with it because that's just how they are. There must be a better way, and there are better ways. You know, games don't need to be as grindy as they are. But going back to my point, yeah, I think developers and some of the hardcore players of those particular games are mistaking a grind for difficulty, and it's not. But they don't want it to change for some weird reason, because it's like a rite of passage, it's like an initiation. Maybe it's just because they've done it, they don't want it to change to be better because they think everyone else should go through it. Maybe that's part of the whole gatekeeping thing. I'm not sure. Anyway, I'll bring that side of the video of this topic to an end, and I'll just quickly talk about what I'm playing because someone asked me. So I finished Elden Ring, loved it, greatest game, one of the greatest games I've ever played. It's one of the rare occasions where I would say a game is a masterpiece. It is a masterpiece. Even as someone who gets a bit stressed and anxious at, you know, combat and dying constantly to bosses and stuff, it's still a piece of art, this game. It really is. And what I like about this game is that there are more options for bosses to not be a problem, you know, so you can over level and make yourself more powerful before you go and take on certain bosses. So in that sense, if you were scared of that, there are ways around it, and you don't even need to kill all the bosses to finish the game. Yeah, you only need a few I think of the grand or great souls from a couple of the bosses to then go on to. I would say some of the bosses are not difficult, particularly the last couple, but the game gives you a lot more tools to deal with that. So yeah, fantastic. Lost Ark, I must confess I've lost a lot of interest in Lost Ark. The upgrade system is appalling. I can't imagine why anyone would think that clicking a button 6 times to upgrade a piece of equipment is fun. Not only do you have to do it on one piece of equipment, you have to do it on, 6 or 7 pieces of equipment. But not only do you have to do it once, you have to do it for every level increment gain. So you're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of clicks to get to a point where you've upgraded your gear at end game. That is ludicrous. I understand why they've done it, because these kind of things, and you've also got a percentage chance which goes down. So I know why they've done it. This type of mechanic plays on people who get this dopamine hit from like a gambling type thing. Am I going to get it? Am I not? And I also understand that this also plays into the pay to win side of things that people talk about, where, oh God, I need to upgrade this item, but it's failed, so I'm going to pay to do it. You don't need to do that to progress. It's worth pointing that out. But as I think we've found out, and I think that a lot of the older, more experienced players were saying initially, maybe it's just because the Western release is not right, but you can get to 1370, whatever it may be, by being free to play. But you've literally got to play all day, every day. That is, and I think that a lot of maybe they were fooled a bit because the game hasn't been released properly over here, and that there are less ways of and less opportunities for you to upgrade your gear. But as it stands, the veteran players who were talking about how much Lost Ark is one of those games that respects your time. So far for me, it's not one of those games. It's like all the other games. As I said, maybe that's a problem with how they've released stuff. I know people were moaning about how Argos was released, when it was released, and what was available to upgrade your character at the time to get to that point to play that raid. But as it is, I don't think those players were right, and I think that the game is a massive grind beyond imagining if you want to be free to play. And also, as I said before, the upgrade system, like clicking some buttons to upgrade. I mean, maybe people who play Korean MMOs, maybe that's how it is and that's what they're used to. Me, I'm old-fashioned. If I want a new piece of chainmail, I'd rather go in and do actual gameplay to get it rather than clicking buttons. So yeah, it's funny because I enjoyed a lot of Lost Ark, and up until now I've got a lot. The thing is, I've got a lot of content from Lost Ark on the free to play side. So there is a lot of content there, but getting to the end game, I mean, I think my highest character is my sorcerer. She's about 850 gear score, and I'm just bored of clicking buttons, really. And then the higher you go, the less chance you've got it. So I'm sick of clicking buttons and it failing. It's just not. That's not a fun way it's not a fun character progression system for me. But that's just me. New World, I'm still playing, believe it or not. Like I played a bit today. New World, I still love the things about New World that I loved before. So the going around, basically I spend all of my time running around the world exploring. Even areas that I've been to 100 times, because I find it a great world to explore and be in, even if you've been to certain locations more than once. And I still get that dopamine hit from gathering or mining a node or whatever it may be, or opening a chest. Even though it's got to a point where I kind of know what I'm going to get from that stuff, it still gives me that kind of rush when I'm doing it. And at the moment, I'm currently gathering up lots of resources, and then I'm going to start maxing out the rest of the trade skills that I haven't maxed out. I don't actually do much combat because the combat's naff. The problem with New World is, one, it implemented a PvE system on the rush because they knew PvP wasn't going to sustain the game, even though everyone's left anyway. And two, the combat is just boring, and it's boring because of things I mentioned before. But the New World combat is doubly boring because they're worried about PvP balance. So, in New World, a mob's not going to charm you. You're not going to be able to charm a mob to use it in a fight. There's no real crowd control when you're fight, I'm talking about PvE here. There's no real crowd control or any real ways of kind of manipulating a fight in any interesting way. If you're running around a world and you see a tiger or a lion, you can't tame it, because obviously how they're going to balance pets in PvP, you know, that would be a bit of a nightmare. All the weapons that come out are pretty boring. They've all got 6, like the Void Gauntlet and the Blunderbuss were 2 weapons that I was really looking forward to, but they're dull. You know, all the weapons have got 6 active abilities to choose from. You can only choose 3 of them. Most of the weapons have got at least 1 or 2 on the tree that are just rubbish, so no one uses them. So the combat is just the same rotations over and over and over again, thousands of times, and it's just not fun. And there's no emergent gameplay because there's nothing going on. There's no mobs that are going to do anything interesting. I can't do anything interesting apart from shoot or spam, you know, attacks. I can't charm something. I can't use a bard skill, for example, to make something my pet temporary, to fight something else, or to lower the aggro, or to stun them or mesmerize them, or whatever it is that I want to do, how I want to manipulate combat. There isn't any of that. The mobs don't do anything interesting. They run at you and they just stay there until you kill them. They don't run off. They don't call for help. You know, it's all very, very dull from a new world point of view. But I do like the world immersion exploring experience, so that's why I'm still playing it. Yeah. Final Fantasy 14 I'm also playing. I know that a lot of these problems that I get with MMOs is probably the fact that I'm just playing too many. What I have tried to do with them, like with New World, I got to the end game, so my character is quite strong, so whenever they release new content, my character's kind of ready for that. So that's what I tried to do with New World. I tried to do the same with Lost Ark. So I was up to a point where when they was releasing new content, I'll be ready for it, but the upgrade system I think is probably not for me, so I'm not sure how much more time I'm going to invest in Lost Ark. Final Fantasy 14, so those 2 games I've kind of reached where I am. Final Fantasy 14 is like a newer MMO that I'm playing, and I'm enjoying it. It's very story driven. It's weird. It seems quite solo friendly, even though you can do all the stuff in a group if you want to. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it because it's different. You know, I'm someone who I never heard of this word called weeb before. It wasn't something that I was familiar with. But I think it's the same as back in the day. We used to call them otakus. Someone who was like religiously, you know, was a big Japanese Chad, as it were. You know, they were really into their Japanese stuff, and I still am really into Japanese anime, manga, gaming, that kind of thing. So, but I haven't really played a Final Fantasy game since Final Fantasy 7 on the PlayStation. I kind of stopped playing them basically. So this is quite a nice change because aesthetically, like the world design, the world building, the architecture, all that kind of thing is quite fresh because I haven't played a Japanese inspired game, you know, too much recently. I know Elden Ring is, you know, and the Souls games are Japanese, aren't they? I believe, or Korean or whatever it may be. But I think they've got more of like a Western high fantasy kind of vibe going on. Yeah, so I like it for that. The story is quite good. The characters are interesting. Some of the quests are really interesting. It makes me laugh. Some of the characters are really funny. I quite like some of the character work. Some of the character work is really funny, and it does make me laugh. And I've been enjoying that. I mean, been enjoying the story. There's a lot of cutscenes and stuff, and there's some spoken dialogue. So if that's not your thing in an MMO, you're probably not going to like Final Fantasy 14. Yeah, so I'm enjoying all that side of things. Up until now, though, the combat again is still it feels kind of basic. Like even when I'm only level 30, but some of the dungeons I've done, and I fought a boss at the end. Like I'm playing a mage, so a lot of it is just me standing in the same spot, like spamming my rotations. I do like the fact that you do have rotations that are kind of meaningful. So you'll use certain skills, it'll build up something else, and you use that skill, which is like a big flourishing finish kind of thing and all that kind of stuff. So there is a purpose to the rotations. It's not just, maybe it's a character that I'm playing. I want to unlock Red Mage at some point. Someone's said to me that that's a really interesting class to play. But so far the combat has consisted of standing in a spot and firing my rotations, occasionally moving out of a red circle or a red rectangle. But other than that, yeah, I'm not finding the combat too yeah, too what shall I say, inspiring. I did watch some people like soloing and grouping in some endgame raids and stuff, and I still wasn't particularly inspired. It still seems to be a lot of just standing around, all focusing on a particular mob. There's not really much going on that's going to throw you out of step if you know the encounter, or something is going to happen. It's going to make you go, "Wow, how did that happen?" You know, there's none of that kind of gameplay going on. But I do like it. You know, I'm enjoying the story and the characters and stuff. One thing I do like is you can do the dungeons with NPCs. And something that it does that is really cool, and I can't believe that other MMOs are not doing this, is that you go into, if you want to do a dungeon, you can do it in a group, or you can use NPCs, or you can do it on your own. So I tried the NPCs one, and one of my NPCs was a tank, and I was amazed. Like the tank, if I initiated a fight, the tank would attack a mob and get aggro. If another mob joined the fight, the tank would quickly swap. This is an NPC tank. This is AI, right? It would quickly swap and get aggro on that mob. The NPCs move out of like red circles, you know, so AoE attacks or big attacks, they'll move out of those. It's interesting watching a tank get aggro, then it will go over to a mage and hit the mage to get aggro on that. Then it will come back to the mob it was fighting. The mob will do like an area attack, and the tank will sidestep out of the way. All that kind of stuff. Like, I was amazed by that. I can't believe that other MMOs are not doing that. You know, he really is missing a trick there. It was really, really cool. And so that was actually one of the things in Final Fantasy 14 where I went, wow, that's good. You know, other games should try and do that. That really, really works. I know that some people say, oh, it's an MMO, you got to play with other people. No, you haven't. You know, I really don't think that you have. An MMO, particularly a sandbox, there should be ways of playing it however you like. You know, even if you need to over level to do something, or whatever it may be, like I think a proper MMO experience, like EverQuest was. People talk about EverQuest being group centric and difficult, you know, and it was, but it also allowed you to find quirks and ways of doing things, or over leveling areas to go back to them and that kind of thing. So it allowed you to do that. I don't think that you need to play an MMO in a group necessarily. I don't think that should be a requirement, unless you're talking about maybe some big end raid type stuff. But anyway, yeah, that's it. That's all I've got at the moment. Hope you're enjoying your gaming. As I said, like, just to sum up, I'm kind of in a bit of an MMO funk because MMOs just feel like a massively homogenized, samey experience, whether they're from Korea or Japan or America, wherever they may be from. They just all feel like they're not really pushing any boundaries. And not only are they not pushing boundaries, they've regressed from, you know, the great systems and interesting MMOs that we had over 20 years ago. Just my experience. I know that there'll be some of you out there that are really enjoying the games that you're playing, and that's great. You know, the ones that I'm playing, I'm enjoying, but I guess I'm looking for that unicorn. You know, I'm looking for that unicorn in the forest. I'm looking for that game that's really going to drag me in and keep me there. Maybe it'll be Pantheon. I thought it would be Ashes of Creation, but I'm just not into full PvP games anymore. And although that game seems to be garnering a lot of interest at the moment, I still think full PvP games are still a niche. And I don't think that game is going to be as super popular as some people would have us believe. Although it does look very interesting. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you again. This has been a bit of a marathon video, but I hope you enjoyed it. I'll speak to you again soon.